Blood stained the desert sand as the mountain lion's body lay still. Kneeling beside it, Nahkohe, the starving Apache warrior, trembled from exhaustion. The child stared up at him with wide, terrified eyes, not knowing whether to fear the dead predator or the strange man before her. In the distance, dust clouds rose above the horizon. Riders were coming, many of them. The Apache knew what this meant. The child's people would arrive to find a stranger with their little one, a dead mountain lion, and tracks telling only part of the truth. His parched lips cracked as he attempted a reassuring smile. The exhausted warrior had saved the child with his last ounce of strength. Would it cost him his life? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 suns ago, Nahkohe had been with his people. Now he walked alone, his moccasins worn thin, against the unforgiving desert. The raid on the settlers' cattle camp had gone wrong. Too many guns, too many men. What was supposed to be a simple mission to reclaim their hunting grounds had scattered his war party like leaves in the wind. A broken arrow hung from his belt. The shaft splintered when he'd used it to defend himself during their retreat. It was his only weapon now, his rifle lost, his knife traded for a water skin that had been empty since yesterday. Nahkohe's stomach had long since stopped growling. Now it simply ached, a hollow cavern beneath his ribs. His tongue felt like dried leather in his mouth. The mountains to the west seemed no closer than they had been at dawn, their promise of streams and game as distant as the moon. He had traveled at night when possible, avoiding the scorching sun. The darkness brought its own dangers, rattlesnakes seeking warmth on rocks, still holding the day's heat, nocturnal predators on their own desperate hunts. But Nahkohe preferred these threats to the risk of mounted patrols that sometimes swept the valleys during daylight. At midday, he crouched in the meager shade of a stunted juniper. In his weakened state, memories came unbidden. His father teaching him to track when he was still a small boy, his wife's face as he had left for the raid, her eyes betraying worry, while her words gave strength. His son, barely walking, who would not understand if his father never returned. "I will see them again," he whispered in Apache, touching the medicine pouch at his neck. The words emerged like dust from his cracked lips. Rising, Nahkohe noticed a hawk circling overhead. A good sign. Where birds of prey hunted, there might be small game, perhaps ground squirrels or rabbits. And where animals gathered, there might be water. He followed the hawk's path for nearly an hour before the bird disappeared over a ridge. Nahkohe's legs trembled with each step now, but he pressed on. Cresting the ridge required him to use his hands, pulling himself up the final few feet. Below him spread a small valley with scattered brush. His hunter's eye immediately caught the faint trail of disturbed earth. Animal tracks leading toward a depression in the land. Water, perhaps, or at least the memory of it. The descent was more treacherous than the climb. Twice he stumbled, catching himself on rock outcroppings that tore his palms. Pain was good. Pain meant life still flowed through him. The tracks belonged to deer, 3, maybe 4 animals, that had passed through recently. They led to a spot where the ground darkened with moisture. A seep, not quite a spring, where groundwater pushed to the surface between rocks. Nahkohe fell to his knees, digging frantically with his bare hands until water began to pool. He waited, forcing patience, allowing the silt to settle before he cupped his hands and drank. The water was warm and tasted of minerals, but it was the sweetest thing he had ever known. He drank slowly, knowing that too much too quickly would make him sick. Between sips, he dampened his face and neck, feeling strength return like a whisper. After filling his water skin, Nahkohe searched the area for anything edible. Fortune smiled. A prickly pear cactus offered its fruit. Using a sharp stone, he carefully harvested 3 of the red bulbs, removing their spines before consuming the sweet pulp inside. It wasn't enough to fill him, but it might keep him moving until he could find real game. As the sun began its westward descent, Nahkohe considered his options. The mountains still lay at least a day's journey away. His people would be moving north to their summer grounds. To find them, he would need to circle back through lands now crawling with angry settlers. He settled against a boulder, allowing himself a brief rest before the night's travel. Sleep came quickly, his body demanding restoration even as his mind urged vigilance. The dream came as it often did, his grandfather's voice speaking from smoke, telling the stories of their people, of times when Apache rode freely across these lands, of coming trials that would test their strength, of a warrior who would bridge two worlds. Nahkohe woke with a start, the sun now touching the horizon. Something had disturbed his sleep, a sound carried on the wind. He listened, his senses reaching out into the gathering dusk. There it was again, a child's laughter, so out of place in this empty landscape that at first he thought it another dream. But the sound came again, from beyond the next rise. Nahkohe touched his broken arrow. Every instinct told him to avoid settlers, to circle away and continue his journey home. Yet something in that laughter pulled at him. Rising, he moved toward the sound, silent as a shadow lengthening at day's end. The settlement of Copper Creek, nestled between rolling hills and the promise of mountain streams to the west. 27 cabins arranged in a rough circle, with the meeting house at its center. Smoke rose from stone chimneys despite the warm day, women boiling laundry, preparing preserves for the coming winter. Jacob Henderson stood on his porch, watching the activity with a critical eye. 5 years they'd been here, carving a community from wilderness. 5 years of hardship, loss and hard-won progress. His weathered hands gripped a leather-bound journal where he recorded everything: births and deaths, crop yields, weather patterns, and Apache sightings. The latest entry, written in his precise hand: 3rd cattle raid, this season. Peterson lost 2 head, tracks led east. "You're scowling again," Sarah said, appearing beside him. His wife of 17 years carried a basket of mending, her blonde hair streaked with premature silver. "The children will think you're angry with them." "Just thinking," Jacob replied, softening his expression. "McAllister wants to organize another patrol, says we should track them to their camp this time." Sarah's lips thinned. "And bring back more widows, more orphans." She shook her head. "We've lost enough." They had. The Hendersons' oldest son lay beneath a wooden cross on the hillside, taken by fever 2 winters past. Just 16 when they'd put him in the cold ground. "Where's Lily?" Jacob asked, changing the subject. "With Martha Green learning to make candles." Sarah paused in her mending. "She asks about her brother every night still, wants stories about him." Jacob nodded, throat tight. Lily had been just 3 when Thomas died. Now at 5 she clung to memories that weren't truly hers. A brass bell rang from the meeting house. 1 long peal followed by 2 short, work summons. Jacob tucked his journal into his shirt pocket. "The new well," he explained, "should hit water today if Jennings knows his business." Sarah touched his arm. "Mind Lily if you see her wandering. You know how she slips away, like quicksilver through fingers," Jacob said with a hint of pride he couldn't suppress. Their daughter had inherited his restlessness, Sarah's curiosity, and a spirit entirely her own. The settlement buzzed with purpose. The well project had consumed weeks of labor, digging, shoring up walls, preparing the windlass and bucket system. Water meant security, especially with summer heat intensifying and creek levels dropping. Jacob joined the group of men gathered around the well site. Sweat-stained shirts, sun-browned faces, hands calloused from constant work. These were his people now. Former shopkeepers, clerks and city laborers, transformed by frontier necessity. Henderson, Elias McAllister, nodded in greeting. A former cavalry officer, McAllister had appointed himself unofficial security chief. "Been meaning to talk to you about those Apache tracks." Later, Jacob said firmly as Pastor Green began organizing the final phase of well construction. The work proceeded efficiently, men rotating through the most strenuous tasks. By mid-afternoon, the first bucket of clear water was drawn up, prompting cheers and backslapping. Jacob felt the familiar satisfaction of collective achievement, yet his eyes continually scanned the settlement perimeter. It was during the impromptu celebration that Jacob noticed Martha Green hurrying between cabins, face pinched with worry. He excused himself from the men. "Something wrong, Mrs. Green? It's your Lily, Mr. Henderson. I thought she was with the other children, but Mary says she hasn't seen her since before noon." Martha twisted her apron between work-roughened hands. "I've asked everywhere." Cold fear replaced satisfaction. "When exactly did you last see her?" "She was helping dip candles, then said she wanted to see the new well. I told her to wait, that I'd take her when my batch was done. But you know how she is." Jacob didn't wait to hear more. He strode toward the meeting house, calling for attention. "My daughter's missing. Lily's not been seen since midday." His voice carried across the suddenly silent gathering. "We need search parties now." The response was immediate. Men collected rifles, women gathered the remaining children for a head count. Even before Sarah reached his side, white-faced and trembling, Jacob had organized 3 search groups. "She's done this before," Sarah whispered, clutching a small homemade rag doll. "Lily's favorite, left behind in Martha's cabin. She always comes back, and she will this time," Jacob assured her, though the sun's westward journey left only hours of daylight. "But we'll find her first." McAllister approached, rifle in hand. "Henderson, you take the west search. I'll head north with 5 men. Pritchard's group will cover south and east." Jacob nodded, already moving toward the western perimeter, where the settlement gave way to scattered junipers and rising terrain. Behind him, Sarah called their daughter's name, her voice joining the chorus of searchers. The rag doll remained clutched in her hand, its button eyes staring blankly at the darkening sky. Nahkohe crouched at the ridge's edge, observing the small figure below. A child, a girl with hair the color of summer wheat, played near a cluster of rocks, seemingly unaware of how far she had wandered from safety. She sang to herself, collecting colored stones in the front fold of her dress. His first thought was to withdraw. Nothing good could come from proximity to a settler child. Yet something kept him watching, perhaps the peaceful innocence, so rare in these contested lands. The wind shifted slightly, bringing a new scent. Nahkohe froze, his nostrils flaring. Mountain lion, close. His eyes scanned the landscape with renewed intensity until he found it, a tawny form, slinking through brush on the opposite side of the small clearing where the girl played. The predator moved with deadly purpose, its gaze fixed on the oblivious child. Hunger and exhaustion forgotten, Nahkohe assessed his options with the speed of a warrior trained from birth. The distance was too great to reach the child before the lion. Shouting might startle the predator into attacking immediately. His broken arrow would be useless against such a powerful beast. The silver knife strapped to his ankle, his last possession he had kept hidden, even from himself, refusing to trade it for food, caught the sun's glint, a gift from his father upon his first successful hunt. The blade was sharp but short, a desperate weapon against a mountain lion. The predator lowered its body, hindquarters tensing for the leap. Nahkohe moved without further deliberation, half sliding down the rocky slope, dislodging stones that clattered ahead of him. The noise alerted both child and predator. The girl turned with startled eyes. The mountain lion hesitated, its attack momentarily delayed. "Run!" Nahkohe shouted in his own language, then remembered the child would not understand. He waved his arm frantically, but the girl stood frozen, eyes wide with terror, not at the lion she had just noticed, but at him. The mountain lion recovered from its race, refocusing on the easiest prey. It launched toward the child in a fluid arc of muscle and claw. Nahkohe threw himself forward in a desperate lunge, his weakened body responding one final time to his warrior's will. He collided with the big cat in mid-air, the impact driving the breath from his lungs. They tumbled together, a blur of limbs and fury, raising dust from the dry ground. Pain exploded across his chest as claws raked through leather and skin. The lion's beast pinned him, its hot breath on his face carrying the stench of old kills. Nahkohe's left arm was trapped between their bodies, but his right hand still clutched the silver knife. With a strength born of desperation, he drove the blade upward into the mountain lion's throat. Hot blood cascaded over his hand and arm as the animal screamed, a sound like a woman in agony. Its jaws snapped inches from Nahkohe's face, yellowed fangs, seeking purchase. Nahkohe twisted the knife, feeling tissue separate around the blade. The mountain lion thrashed wildly, its back claws disemboweling the earth beside him, rather than his abdomen. Gradually, the animal's movements weakened. Its amber eyes, locked on Nahkohe's, held no malice, only the puzzled confusion of a predator facing unexpected defeat. With a shuddering exhale, the great cat collapsed upon him, its full weight pressing the air from his lungs. For several moments, Nahkohe lay still, blood, his and the lion's, soaking into the thirsty ground. With tremendous effort he rolled the dead weight aside and struggled to a sitting position. The silver knife remained embedded in the mountain lion's throat, its carved handle now slick with blood. Nahkohe made no immediate move to retrieve it, his attention turning instead to the child. She stood exactly where she had been, small hands clutched to her chest, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. She trembled visibly but made no sound. Nahkohe raised an empty hand, palm out, the universal sign of peace. "Safe now," he said in broken English, one of the few phrases he had learned from traders. "Safe." The girl's gaze darted from his face to the dead lion, and back again. A single tentative step backward, then another. Nahkohe remained motionless, fighting the darkness that threatened to close in from the edges of his vision. Blood seeped through the slashes in his buckskin shirt, the wounds burned like fire. "Lily!" A distant call echoed from beyond the ridge. "Lily!" The child's head turned toward the sound, but she did not run or answer. Nahkohe recognized his peril. Soon, armed men would crest the ridge to find their child, with a wounded Apache warrior and a dead mountain lion. They would see only a savage, not a savior. With trembling fingers, he reached toward the knife, intending to reclaim his father's gift before fleeing. The movement sent pain lancing through his torn muscles. The darkness at the edge of his vision expanded, consuming the light. The last thing Nahkohe saw was the child taking a hesitant step toward him as consciousness slipped away like water through cupped hands. Lily Henderson stood perfectly still, caught between terror and fascination. The stranger who had fallen from the sky to battle the mountain lion now lay motionless in the dirt. Blood darkened his buckskin shirt, spreading slowly like spilled ink. The great cat lay beside him, its eyes staring sightlessly at the endless blue above. "Lily!" Her father's voice called again, closer now, but something kept her rooted to this spot. The man had saved her. She had seen it clearly, the mountain lion ready to pounce, this strange man throwing himself between them. Even at 5 years old, Lily understood the significance of such an act. She took a tentative step forward, then another. Her mother had taught her about helping others in need. "We must be Christian people," Sarah often said while tending to sick neighbors or new mothers. The Apache's chest rose and fell in shallow movements. A leather cord around his neck had broken during the struggle, spilling small items into the dust. A hawk's feather, a smooth stone with strange markings, and a small deerskin pouch with intricate beadwork. Lily knelt and gathered these treasures, her small fingers working carefully. The beaded pouch felt warm, as if it held some living essence. She returned the feather and stone to its interior before tying the broken cord into a clumsy knot. "Safe now," she whispered, repeating the man's words back to him. The stranger's eyelids fluttered, revealing dark eyes clouded with pain. He murmured something in his own language before slipping back into unconsciousness. Lily placed the pouch carefully on his chest. She had no water to offer, no way to bind his wound, but she could keep watch until help arrived. "Papa will know what to do," she said, as much to reassure herself as the unhearing warrior. "He fixes everything." A shadow of doubt crossed her face as she remembered the angry conversations she'd overheard. Her father and the other men speaking of Apache devils and savages. Would they understand that this man was different, that he had saved her? The sun beat down mercilessly. Lily removed her small bonnet and held it to provide shade for the stranger's face. His features, relaxed in unconsciousness, seemed less frightening calm, different from her father's sharper, with high cheekbones and copper skin, but not the face of a monster from Fireside Tales. Time passed strangely. Lily sang softly, the same lullabies her mother sang during stormy nights. She shooed away flies attracted to the mountain lion's cooling body. Once, she rose to fetch her scattered stones, arranging them in a circle around herself and the wounded man. A child's instinctive attempt at protection. The Apache stirred occasionally, muttering words she couldn't understand. During one such moment of semi-consciousness, his hand closed around the beaded pouch, clutching it to his chest before he slipped away again. The sound of multiple voices and footsteps broke the afternoon stillness. Lily stood, waving her bonnet above her head. "Here! I'm here!" she called, suddenly desperate for her father, for help for the stranger who had saved her. Jacob Henderson appeared first, rifle ready, face set in grim determination. Behind him came 3 other men from the settlement, similarly armed. They crested the ridge and froze at the tableau before them. Lily standing protectively near a blooded Apache warrior and the carcass of a massive mountain lion. Jacob ran forward, scooping her into his arms, eyes wild with fear and relief. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "The lion was going to eat me," Lily explained, pointing at the dead predator. "But the man saved me. He jumped on the lion and killed it with his knife." Jacob set her down, keeping one hand firmly on her shoulder, while the other maintained its grip on his rifle. He studied the scene, taking in the evidence, the signs of struggle, the Apache's wounds consistent with mountain lion attacks, the silver knife still embedded in the big cat's throat. "McAllister, check if the Apache's alive," Jacob ordered, his voice tight. Elias McAllister approached cautiously, rifle trained on the still form. "Breathing," he confirmed, after a moment. "Badly torn up, though. Won't last the night without tending." "Good," muttered one of the other men. "Let nature take its course. One less savage to worry about." Lily pulled away from her father's grip. "No, he saved me." She ran to the Apache's side, placing herself between him and the men's rifles. "The lion was going to eat me, and he saved me." Jacob's face contorted with conflicting emotions, relief at finding his daughter alive, ingrained hatred for the Apache, and the uncomfortable weight of a debt that couldn't be denied. "Papa," Lily pleaded, tears forming in her eyes. "He said safe now. He made me safe." The beaded pouch rose and fell with each of the warrior's labored breaths. Lily touched it gently, as if it contained the very spirit of the man who had risked everything for a child not of his people. "Please, Papa." Jacob Henderson lowered his rifle. The settlement had erupted into organized chaos when Sarah Henderson realized her daughter was missing. Women gathered the other children, counting heads and confirming that Lily alone had wandered off. Men collected weapons and divided into search parties with grim efficiency, born of frontier necessity. Sarah paced the length of their cabin, twisting a worn leather thong between her fingers, the same one she had used to tie Lily's hair that morning. "She's done this before," Martha Green said, attempting comfort. "Remember when we found her asleep under the miller's wagon?" Sarah nodded mutely, but this time felt different. The sun was already beginning its descent, painting the hills with golden light that would soon give way to darkness, and there had been reports of mountain lions. The leather thong snapped between her tense fingers. Outside, Jacob's voice carried as he organized the men. Pritchard, take 4 men east toward the creek. McAllister, head north along the ridge. I'll take the western approach. Sarah stepped onto the porch, the broken leather still clutched in her hand. I'm coming with you. Jacob turned, his face softening briefly before hardening again with purpose. Stay here. If she returns, Martha will be here. Sarah interrupted, already reaching for her shawl. I won't sit waiting while my child is out there. Something in her tone brooked no argument. Jacob simply nodded, helping her into the wagon, where 3 other men already waited with rifles across their knees. They followed the western trail until it faded into scattered juniper and scrub. From there they proceeded on foot, calling Lily's name, eyes searching the lengthening shadows for any sign of a small girl in a blue dress. Tracks here, announced William Cooper, the settlement's best hunter. He knelt, studying the hard ground. Small boots, heading southwest. Recent, they followed the faint trail, Jacob and Sarah leading, the other men fanning out to cover more ground. With each step, Sarah's dread grew. This was farther than Lily had ever wandered before. Jacob, William called, his voice unnaturally tight. Blood here. Sarah's heart stuttered. She rushed forward with Jacob, both dropping to their knees beside the dark stains on the sandy soil. Animal blood, William clarified quickly, studying the spatter pattern. Something died here, or was killed. Recently. Lily, Jacob shouted, his voice echoing off the hills. Lily, a distant sound answered, not a child's voice, but the nervous whinny of horses. McAllister's search party appeared along the northern ridge, riding hard toward them. Henderson, McAllister called as they approached. We found sign. There's been a struggle up ahead, and Apache tracks. The word fell like a stone. Apache, every settler's nightmare given form. Sarah clutched the broken leather thong to her chest, a prayer forming on her lips. Mount up, Jacob commanded, helping Sarah onto William's horse before climbing behind McAllister. They rode toward the next ridge, horses straining against the steep terrain. McAllister handed Jacob a brass telescope, another relic of his cavalry days. Just beyond that outcropping, we saw movement but couldn't identify. Jacob extended the telescope, focusing on the area ahead. His sharp intake of breath told Sarah everything before he spoke. I see her, he said, voice thick with emotion. She's alive. Sarah reached for the telescope, but Jacob was already spurring the horse forward. The search party followed, rifles ready, moving with renewed purpose. They crested the ridge as the last direct sunlight faded from the valley. The scene below stopped them cold. Lily standing protectively beside the still form of an Apache warrior, the massive carcass of a mountain lion nearby. Hold, Jacob commanded as several rifles rose. My daughter is down there. They descended cautiously, Jacob in the lead, Sarah close behind. As they approached, Lily finally looked up, waving her small bonnet. Here, I'm here, her voice carried on the evening air. Jacob broke into a run, reaching his daughter first, gathering her into his arms with desperate relief. Sarah arrived moments later, falling to her knees beside them, hands running over Lily's face and arms, seeking injuries. The lion was going to eat me, Lily explained, pointing to the dead predator, but the man saved me. Only then did Sarah truly register the Apache warrior lying unconscious nearby, his buckskin shirt shredded and soaked with blood. The silver knife in the mountain lion's throat, the evidence of what had truly happened. McAllister approached the warrior cautiously. Breathing, he announced, badly torn up. One of the men muttered something about letting the Apache die, and Sarah watched her daughter pull away from Jacob to stand protectively between the wounded man and the settler's rifles. No, he saved me, Lily cried. The broken leather thong slipped from Sarah's fingers as she moved forward, maternal instinct extending beyond her own child to this man who had preserved her daughter's life. Years of ingrained fear warred with something deeper, a recognition of humanity that transcended tribal boundaries. Jacob, she said quietly, meeting her husband's conflicted gaze. We can't leave him. Dawn broke over the eastern hills, painting the land in shades of amber and gold. Jacob Henderson stood on his porch, a copper compass held open in his palm, a relic from his days as a surveyor back east. The needle wavered, its direction clear but his own path anything but. The settlement had slept fitfully, if at all. An Apache warrior lay in Henderson's own tool shed, his wounds tended by Sarah as best she could manage. Two armed men stood guard outside, more to keep the settlement's angry residents away than to prevent the grievously injured man from escaping. "Any change?" Jacob asked as William Cooper approached, rifle cradled in his arms. "Still breathing," Cooper replied. "Your wife's with him now." McAllister's gathered quite a crowd at the meeting house. Jacob snapped the compass closed, pocketing it. "I expect he has." The settlement's central area hummed with tension. Nearly every adult had gathered, faces grim in the early light. Children peered from cabin windows, sensing the gravity of adult concerns without understanding their nature. "Henderson," McAllister called as Jacob approached. "Time to settle this matter." The crowd parted, revealing McAllister standing on the meeting house steps, Pastor Green beside him, looking uncomfortable. "What matter would that be, McAllister?" Jacob kept his voice level, though he knew perfectly well. "The Apache," McAllister spat. "You brought an enemy into our midst, a scout, most likely. Where there's one, there's a war party nearby." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Fear was a tangible presence, as real as the morning dew soaking their boots. "He saved my daughter's life," Jacob stated, loud enough for all to hear. "Killed a mountain lion with nothing but a knife. The wounds that nearly killed him came from protecting Lily." "So your girl says," McAllister countered. "Children imagine all sorts of things." "The evidence was clear enough," Jacob replied. "Or perhaps you think the Apache asked the mountain lion to claw him half to death as part of an elaborate ruse." A few nervous chuckles broke the tension, quickly silenced by McAllister's glare. "The Bible teaches mercy," Pastor Green interjected. "If this man indeed saved the child—" "The Bible also speaks of protecting your household," interrupted Thomas Jenkins, who had lost a brother to an Apache raid 2 territories over. "What about the next raid? Will you feel righteous when they burn us out, knowing you nursed one of them back to health?" The argument might have continued, but a commotion from the direction of Henderson's cabin drew everyone's attention. Sarah appeared, supporting a figure who seemed more ghost than man. The Apache warrior stood shakily, one arm heavily bandaged and bound to his chest, buckskin shirt replaced by one of Jacob's old linens. His face remained proud, despite his weakness, dark eyes taking in the assembled settlers with watchful intensity. "What is this?" Jacob demanded, striding toward them. "He insisted," Sarah explained quietly. "He understood enough to know they're talking about him, said he would face it standing." The Apache straightened as much as his wounds allowed, looking directly at Jacob. In halting, broken English, he spoke. "Nahkohe, not enemy." The stunned silence fell over the gathering. Few had expected the savage to speak their language at all, much less declare himself by name. McAllister recovered first, stepping forward with his rifle raised. "See? He understands English, probably been spying on settlements for months. Or trading," Cooper suggested. "Some Apache bands trade with the missions south of here." Nahkohe's gaze never left Jacob's face. With deliberate movements, he reached for the copper compass visible in Jacob's shirt pocket. Several rifles came up instantly. Jacob held up a hand, stilling them as he allowed the Apache to take the compass. Nahkohe opened it, studied the needle, then pointed west. "My people," he said simply. Then, closing the compass, he returned it to Jacob and touched his own chest. "Life debt, your child," he pointed to Jacob. "Your mercy." The simple dignity of the gesture affected even the most hardened among them. This was not the raving savage of fireside tales, but a man acknowledging a debt of honor. "What would you have us do, Henderson?" Pastor Green asked into the silence. "The decision falls to you, as it was your child he saved." Jacob felt the weight of the compass in his palm, heavy with more than metal. Every face turned to him. Sarah's imploring, McAllister's challenging, the settlement's fearful, and Nahkohe's unflinching. "We'll keep him here until he's healed," Jacob declared finally. "Under guard. When he's strong enough to travel, we'll decide what comes next." "And if his people come looking meanwhile?" McAllister demanded. Jacob's fingers closed around the compass, feeling its solid certainty. "Then, we'll face that when it comes. But we won't murder a man who saved my daughter, Apache or not. That's not who we are. That's not who we can afford to become." The crowd dispersed slowly, some nodding approval, others muttering dissent. McAllister lingered, face dark with contained fury. "This isn't over, Henderson." "No," Jacob agreed, watching as Sarah helped Nahkohe back toward their cabin. "I expect it's just beginning." Days passed with the weight of stones dropping into still water. Nahkohe's condition improved gradually under Sarah's determined care, though fever still claimed him when darkness fell. The tool shed had been converted to a makeshift recovery room, straw pallet, water bucket, and a single high window that allowed sunlight but no escape. A copper bell hung from a leather strap beside the door. Jacob's compromise with McAllister. Any movement in the night would ring it, alerting the guards posted outside. The arrangement spoke volumes about the settlement's divided feelings, medical care offered with one hand, suspicion maintained with the other. On the fourth morning, Jacob entered carrying a wooden tray with cornbread and water. Nahkohe sat upright against the wall, more alert than previous days. Their eyes met in silent assessment. "My wife says your wounds are healing," Jacob said, setting down the tray. "No infection." Nahkohe nodded once. "Your woman has good medicine." The Apache's improving English surprised Jacob. "You understand our language well. Trade with Mexicans, with white men sometimes. Listen, learn." Nahkohe's face remained impassive, yet his eyes missed nothing. The knife Jacob carried at his belt, the suspicion still evident in his stance. "My daughter asks about you," Jacob said, watching for a reaction. "She calls you her lion fighter." Something softened briefly in Nahkohe's expression. "The child is, well, she is," Jacob hesitated. "I owe you a debt I cannot repay, but that doesn't mean I trust you or your people." Nahkohe touched his bandaged chest. "Trust is earned, like scars." A commotion outside interrupted them, excited voices approaching. The door swung open without warning, and Lily darted inside before Sarah could catch her. "Lion fighter," the child exclaimed, stopping just short of throwing herself at the wounded man. "Mama said you're better today." "Lily," Sarah reached the doorway, flushed with exertion and embarrassment. "I told you to wait." Jacob moved to intercept his daughter, but paused, watching the interaction. Nahkohe showed no alarm at the child's sudden appearance. Instead, he inclined his head in formal greeting. "Little one," he said softly. "Brave like warrior." Lily beamed, fishing something from her pocket. "I made this for you." She held out a small, crude carving, a wooden mountain lion whittled by inexperienced hands. Jacob recognized his own pocket knife's work. Sarah's guilty expression confirmed she had helped with the forbidden project. Nahkohe accepted the gift with grave courtesy, examining it with exaggerated care. "Strong lion," he pronounced. "Good medicine. It's to protect you," Lily explained earnestly. "Papa says you're still sick from fighting the real lion." "Lily, that's enough," Jacob said gently. "Nahkohe needs rest." Mr. Lily frowned at the unfamiliar title applied to the Apache. "Come, sweetheart." Sarah extended her hand. "We can visit again when he's stronger." Reluctantly, Lily allowed herself to be led away, turning back once to wave. Nahkohe raised the wooden carving in acknowledgement. When they were alone again, Jacob found himself at a loss. The brief interaction had revealed a side of the Apache he hadn't expected. Gentleness, patience with a child's enthusiasm. "Your people," Jacob said finally. "They'll be looking for you." Nahkohe placed the wooden lion carefully beside his pallet. "Yes. Will they attack our settlement when they find you here?" The Apache considered this, not answering immediately. "Depends. If they think I am prisoner, yes. If they know about child, mountain lion, he made a balancing gesture with his hands. How do we let them know? Jacob asks, surprising himself with the question. Smoke signals, or I go to them when strong. Nahkohe met Jacob's gaze directly. I give my word, no harm to your people if I am released. Jacob rubbed his beard thoughtfully. Your word may not be enough for some here. Then what is enough? Nahkohe's question held no challenge, only genuine inquiry. The copper bell caught Jacob's attention, its dull gleam a reminder of the precarious situation. I don't know, he admitted, but killing you would have been easier than this uncertainty. Yet here I am, Nahkohe observed, because you are a father before you are an enemy. The simple truth of this struck Jacob deeply. He had made his decision the moment he lowered his rifle in the valley, not from political calculation, but from recognition of a debt that transcended tribal boundaries. Rest, Jacob said, moving toward the door. We'll speak again. Nahkohe nodded, fingers tracing the crude wooden lion. The child has her father's heart. Jacob paused, hand on the doorframe, and her mother's stubborn will. God help us all. A ghost of a smile touched Nahkohe's lips as Jacob closed the door behind him. Outside, McAllister waited with poorly concealed impatience. Well, learn anything useful? Jacob brushed past him. Only that things are rarely as simple as we wish them to be. The copper bell swayed silently in the morning breeze, marking a boundary that seemed increasingly arbitrary with each passing day. Sarah Henderson unwrapped the blood-soaked bandages from Nahkohe's chest, her movements gentle but precise. The morning light streamed through the shed's small window, illuminating angry red wounds still puckered along their edges. Better than yesterday, yet far from healed. These need cleaning again, she said, more to herself than to her patient. Nahkohe watched her work, his dark eyes following each practiced motion. Her hands, roughened by frontier life yet still maintaining a certain grace, moved with the confidence of someone familiar with suffering's aftermath. On a small table beside them lay an old bone-handled brush, once part of Sarah's vanity set from her previous life in Boston, now repurposed for cleaning wounds. Its bristles, originally intended for her golden hair, had been trimmed short and stiffened for medical use. Your husband, Nahkohe said, breaking the comfortable silence. He was not happy when you took my medicine pouch. Sarah smiled slightly, dipping the brush in a bowl of hot water, infused with wild garlic and prairie sage. Jacob worries I'm becoming too familiar with Apache ways. She had indeed studied the contents of Nahkohe's medicine pouch with fascination, recognizing some herbs, puzzling over others, respecting the careful organization that spoke of generations of healing knowledge. This will sting, she warned before applying the brush to the deepest wound. Nahkohe didn't flinch, though a bead of sweat formed at his temple. My people say pain is the body remembering. Remembering what? That it is alive. His gaze held hers briefly. Your medicine and mine not so different. Sarah considered this as she worked. Her father had been a doctor in Boston, his shelves lined with leather-bound medical texts. She had absorbed his knowledge in quiet defiance of propriety, reading his journals by candlelight long after proper young ladies should have been asleep. I recognize the willow bark in your pouch, she said. My father used it for pain and fever. Good medicine, Nahkohe agreed. Works for all people, red or white. Sarah set aside the brush and reached for fresh bandages. My father would have been fascinated by your healing ways. He believed knowledge should be gathered from all sources. A wise man, he died believing I had made a terrible mistake marrying Jacob and coming west. Sarah's hands paused momentarily. He couldn't understand that I needed to build something of my own, away from Boston society. Nahkohe nodded slowly. To find your true path. Yes. She resumed bandaging, surprised at having shared something so personal with a man who, by all the settlement standards, should remain a faceless enemy. Your wounds are healing well. Another week, and you'll be strong enough to pet. She stopped, uncertain how to finish. To be sent away, Nahkohe completed matter-of-factly. That's not for me to decide. A light knock interrupted them, and Martha Green peered around the door. Her eyes widened at the sight of Sarah's casual proximity to the Apache, though she quickly masked her reaction. "Pastors called a meeting at midday," Martha said, "about our situation." Her eyes flickered toward Nahkohe. "Jacob asked me to tell you." "Thank you, Martha. I'll be there." After Martha departed, an awkward silence descended. Sarah finished bandaging Nahkohe's chest, acutely aware of the impropriety Martha had perceived. A settler woman, alone with an Apache warrior, conversing as equals. "Your people fear me," Nahkohe observed. "They fear what they don't understand." Sarah collected her supplies, including the bone-handled brush, which she placed carefully in her basket. "And there is much history between our peoples. Not all of it peaceful. On both sides," Nahkohe acknowledged. "Blood calls for blood, until someone chooses differently." Sarah paused at the door. "Is that why you saved my daughter? Choosing differently?" Nahkohe considered this, his expression thoughtful. "I saw only a child in danger, not a white child, just a little one who needed protection." He touched the wooden lion carving that now sat beside his pallet. "Some things should stand above old hatreds." Sarah nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "I'll bring food after the meeting." Outside she found McAllister lounging against the wall, rifle across his knees in casual threat. His eyes narrowed at her medical basket. "Wasting good supplies on him, Mrs. Henderson." "My supplies to waste, Mr. McAllister. And if we need those medicines for our own people." Sarah held his gaze steadily. "Then we'll have them. Nothing I've used can't be replaced." "It's not just supplies I'm worried about being replaced," McAllister said darkly. "Careful you don't let savage ways creep in where they don't belong." Sarah clutched her basket tighter, feeling the smooth handle of the bone brush pressing against her palm. "I find, Mr. McAllister, that wisdom can come from unexpected sources. Good day." She walked away with straight shoulders, the same posture her finishing school teacher had drilled into her as a girl. Behind her civilized exterior, however, something had shifted like a compass, finding true north after long disorientation. The bone brush had cleaned wounds of all kinds in its years of service. Perhaps it could help bridge wounds less visible, but far deeper, between two peoples who had seen only enemies in each other for too long. The Apache camp nestled in a hidden valley 3 ridges west of Copper Creek Settlement. 37 shelters arranged in the traditional circle, smoke rising from cooking fires as women prepared the evening meal. Children played among the lodges while elders watched with weathered eyes that missed nothing. Chano sat before the council fire, his father's ceremonial pipe held carefully in his hands. The pipe's red stone bowl, carved with symbols of the 4 directions, had passed through 5 generations of their family. Today it remained unlit, a sign of mourning or uncertainty. 7 days, Chano said to the 5 men gathered around him. 7 days since my brother Nahkohe failed to return. Tall Bear, the oldest of the council, nodded gravely. The raiding party reports that they were separated during the retreat. They saw him heading west, toward our summer grounds. Yet he did not arrive. Chano traced the carvings on the pipe with his thumb. Nahkohe knows these lands better than any of us. If he could return, he would have. Unless he was captured, said Black Knife, a warrior known for his aggressive tactics. Or killed. A pained expression crossed Chano's face, quickly masked. As acting chief during his brother's absence, he could not show weakness. "We found no body," he replied, "and the white eyes rarely take prisoners." "The tracks tell a story for those who can read them," Tall Bear said. 4 of our young men have been scouting. They returned with news." At Chano's gesture, a young warrior named Two Hawks stepped forward. His moccasins were dust-covered from long travel, his face solemn with responsibility. "We followed Nahkohe's trail west from where the raiding party last saw him," Two Hawks reported. 3 days he traveled alone, growing weaker. "We found where he rested, where he dug for water." The young scout paused, then his path changed. He turned south, toward the white settlement. Murmurs arose from the council circle. Chano's grip tightened on the pipe. Why would he go there? My brother is no fool. Two Hawks shook his head. The signs are clear but strange. His tracks join those of a child, small boot prints. Then, blood on the ground, much blood, and signs of struggle. The marks of a great cat, mountain lion, I believe. Was he killed? Black Knife demanded. The blood trail leads toward the settlement. Two Hawks continued, and there were many boot prints following, white men's boots. They took something heavy from that place. He met Chano's gaze directly. I believe they took Nahkohe, either dead or alive. Silence fell over the council. Chano stared into the fire, mind racing with possibilities. There is more, Two Hawks added reluctantly. We scouted close to the settlement. They have posted extra guards, and in a small building apart from the others, there are always men watching. Someone is inside that building. Hope flared in Chano's chest. My brother lives. Perhaps, Tall Bear cautioned, or perhaps they hold his body for some white man's purpose. Black Knife spat into the dust. If they have taken Nahkohe prisoner, we should attack now, before they can use him against us. Several warriors nodded agreement, but Chano raised his hand for silence. We will not act in haste, he declared. If my brother lives as their prisoner, a direct attack could mean his death. He set the unlit pipe carefully beside the fire. I will lead a smaller party. We will learn the truth before deciding our course, and if he is dead, Black Knife challenged. Chano's eyes hardened. Then we will mourn him properly, and the settlement will burn. The council dispersed as night descended fully. Chano remained by the fire, thoughts turning to his brother's wife and young son. He had not told them of the scouts' discoveries, wanting certainty before bringing either hope or final grief. In his lodge, he prepared for the journey. 10 warriors would accompany him, enough for rescue, small enough to move undetected. As he gathered his weapons, his hand fell upon a small deerskin pouch containing 4 white eagle feathers. Nahkohe's most prized possession. Before the ill-fated cattle raid, Nahkohe had asked Chano to keep the feathers safe. Until I return, he had said with a smile. Now those words hung in the air like smoke without fire. Chano secured the feather pouch to his belt. If his brother lived, he would want these sacred objects returned. If he had walked into the spirit world, the feathers would help guide his journey. As dawn approached, Chano led his small band from the camp. They traveled in silence, following the path. 2 Hawks had discovered. The morning sun found them on a ridge, overlooking Copper Creek settlement from the west. Close enough to observe, far enough to remain undetected. Through a small brass spyglass, taken from a cavalry officer many seasons ago, Chano studied the cluster of wooden buildings. Activity seemed normal, women hanging laundry, men working fields, children carrying water. Then he saw it, the small outbuilding with 2 armed men stationed out. Too many guards for a storage shed, too vigilant for ordinary duty. There, he said quietly, passing the spyglass to Running Elk beside him. That is where they keep him, alive or dead. Running Elk questioned. Chano narrowed his eyes, searching for any sign, any clue to his brother's fate. We will find out, he promised, fingers brushing against the feather pouch at his belt. Tonight, Nahkohe sat upright on his pallet, strength returning to his body with each passing day. The mountain lion's slashes had begun to heal into pink ridges that would eventually fade to silver, new stories written on his skin. Outside, he could hear the settlement stirring with morning activities, the familiar sounds of a community beginning its day. Jacob Henderson entered carrying a wooden slate and a small chunk of chalk. Without preamble, he set these items on the floor between them and took a seat on the room's only stool. My wife says you'll be strong enough to travel soon, Jacob began. Nahkohe nodded once. 3, maybe 4 days. That presents us with a problem. Jacob picked up the chalk, turning it thoughtfully between his fingers. Some here want you gone immediately. Others, he hesitated. Others think letting you go means you'll return with a war party. I gave my word, Nahkohe reminded him. Your word means something to you. To me, even after these days, but not to everyone. Jacob scratched his beard thoughtfully. McAllister has called a settlement meeting for tomorrow. They'll vote on what to do with you. Nahkohe's expression remained impassive, though his eyes narrowed slightly. And what does Jacob Henderson want? The question hung in the air between them. Jacob set the chalk down on the slate with a soft click. I want to understand, he said finally. Before that meeting, I need to know more about you, your people, why you were separated from them. He tapped the slate. I thought this might help where words fail. Nahkohe studied the simple writing tools, then reached for the chalk. His first strokes were hesitant, unused to the medium, but soon he began drawing with increasing confidence. Mountains took shape, then a river, valleys, and finally 2 circles, one larger than the other. My people, he said, pointing to the larger circle. Your settlement, he added, indicating the smaller one. He drew a line connecting them, then crossed it out. Bad blood, many seasons. Jacob nodded. The raids, survival, Nahkohe corrected. These valleys, he circled a region with the chalk. Hunting grounds for Apache for many generations. Your people came, built fences. Cattle eat the grass their deer need. Jacob wanted to argue but forced himself to listen. Go on. Nahkohe drew several figures near the Apache circle. Raiders from my band. I was with them. His honesty was unflinching. We took cattle. Your men came with guns. He made small X marks across the slate. We scattered. I was separated, headed west. Then he drew a small figure, and what was clearly a mountain lion, found the child. You could have avoided her, continued west. Nahkohe set down the chalk, dust coating his copper fingers. Could you have walked away? The question struck Jacob like a physical blow. Of course he couldn't have, neither as a father nor simply as a man. In that moment he recognized a commonality that transcended their difference. Jacob picked up the chalk, adding to the drawing the settlement search parties, finding Nahkohe and Lily, bringing them back. As he drew, he explained the settlement's fears, the history of attacks from other Apache bands, the vulnerability they felt on the frontier. When he finished, they both stared at the slate covered in their combined storytelling, a shared narrative drawn by hands from different worlds. From his shirt pocket, Jacob withdrew a small object, a silver whistle on a leather cord. This was my son's, he said quietly. Thomas, we lost him to fever 2 winters past. Nahkohe said nothing, respecting the weight of the revelation. He was 16, full of dreams about this frontier. Jacob turned the whistle in his hand. He used this to call the cattle, said it made him feel like a real rancher. A warrior, Nahkohe observed. Not by battle, but by purpose. Jacob nodded. Lily asks about him every day, and when she speaks of you, her lion fighter, I see the same light in her eyes, the one that says someone is a hero in her world. He held out the whistle, surprising both himself and Nahkohe. I can't send you back to your people as an enemy, not when my daughter would never understand. Nahkohe didn't take the whistle, but acknowledged the gesture with a slight inclination of his head. What will you tell your people tomorrow? The truth, Jacob said, returning the whistle to his pocket. That you were raiding our cattle. Yes. That you saved my child. Yes. That you are a man with family waiting, just as I am. He stood, brushing chalk dust from his hands. And that I believe your word when you say you'll prevent your people from attacking us. And if they do not believe as you do. Jacob picked up the slate, looking down at their shared drawing, the visual representation of their intertwined fates. Then I'll remind them that we came to this frontier to build something better than what we left behind. Not to become something worse. As Jacob turned to leave, Nahkohe spoke once more. Your son's spirit watches over your daughter's mine will watch over your people, if you let me return to my own. Jacob paused at the door, the slate tucked under his arm. I'll send Sarah with food shortly. Outside he stood for a moment in the clear morning light, the weight of tomorrow's meeting heavy on his shoulder. Silver whistle pressed against his chest through his shirt pocket, a reminder of one son lost and a promise to protect what remained of his family, even if that protection came from unexpected quarters. Night settled over the settlement like a wool blanket, heavy and dark. Quarter moon provided scant illumination as Jacob made his final rounds, checking on livestock and the men standing watch. The day's settlement meeting had been contentious, voices raised as neighbors argued over Nahkohe's fate. No consensus had been reached, only an agreement to reconvene tomorrow for a final vote. Jacob's boots crunched on gravel as he approached the shed where Nahkohe was kept. Cooper nodded in greeting, rifle balanced across his knees as he sat on an upturned barrel. "Quiet night," Cooper reported. "Indian hasn't made a sound." "Get some rest," Jacob replied. "I'll take the watch till dawn." Cooper hesitated. "McAllister won't like that. Says you're too soft on the Apache." "McAllister isn't in charge," Jacob said firmly. "Go on now." After Cooper departed, Jacob settled onto the barrel, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, the occasional hoot of an owl, distant coyotes calling to one another. His hand rested on an antler-handled hunting knife sheathed at his belt, a gift from his father-in-law when he and Sarah had left Boston. The old doctor had pressed it into his hands with simple instructions: keep her safe out there in the wilderness. Jacob had kept that promise as best he could, though the frontier had exacted its price with Thomas's death. Now, he found himself questioning what safety truly meant. Was it walls and weapons and constant vigilance against perceived enemy, or something deeper, the building of understanding where fear had reigned? A soft scratching from inside the shed interrupted his thoughts. "Henderson," Nahkohe's voice came low through the wooden door. "Listen." Jacob rose, hand instinctively moving to his knife. "What is it?" "My people, they are coming." A chill ran down Jacob's spine. He unlocked the door, stepping inside to find Nahkohe sitting alert on his pallet, head tilted slightly as if listening to something beyond human hearing. "How do you know?" Jacob demanded, keeping his voice low. "An owl called 3 times, then twice, then 3 again." "Not an owl." Nahkohe's dark eyes held Jacob's. "My brother Chano. He signals me." Jacob's grip tightened on the knife handle. "You said they wouldn't attack if they knew about Lily." "They do not know yet. They see only that I am held here." Nahkohe rose smoothly to his feet. His strength mostly returned. "Let me speak with them, before blood is shed." Jacob stood frozen in indecision. This could be a trap. Nahkohe signaling his people for rescue or coordinating an attack, yet the Apache had had multiple opportunities to harm them over the past week and had not. And if his people were truly nearby, how many? Jacob asked. 10, perhaps 12 warriors. My brother would not bring more for a scouting party. Nahkohe stepped closer. "Jacob Henderson, I gave my word. Now I ask for yours. Let me prevent death this night." The sincerity in the Apache's voice was unmistakable. Jacob withdrew the antler-handled knife from its sheath, watching Nahkohe's reaction carefully. But the warrior made no move toward the weapon. "If I let you go," Jacob said, "how do I know you'll return?" "You don't," Nahkohe answered simply. "Faith requires uncertainty." Jacob turned the knife in his hand, its polished handle gleaming dully in the lantern light. Then, with a decision that went against everything he'd been taught about the Apache, he extended it handle first to Nahkohe. "Take it," he said. "Not as a weapon, but as a token. This knife was given to me to protect my family." He met Nahkohe's surprised gaze. "Bring it back to me before dawn, as proof of your word." Nahkohe accepted the knife with ceremonial gravity, recognizing the trust it represented. "I will return before the sun touches the eastern hills. Keep your men close to the buildings tonight. Tell them not to shoot at shadows." Jacob nodded. "Go then. But remember, some here would rather see you dead than free. If you're seen before I can explain, I understand." Nahkohe slipped the knife into his belt. "Thank you, Jacob Henderson." They exited the shed together, moving silently into the darkness. At the edge of the settlement, where building shadows met open ground, they paused. "Good luck," Jacob whispered. Nahkohe touched the knife at his belt, then melted into the night as if he were a part of it. Jacob stood watching the empty darkness for several long moments. wondering if he had just made the wisest decision of his life or the most foolish. Either way, there was no turning back. Jacob returned to the center of the settlement, gathering the night watchmen. "Stay close to the buildings tonight," he instructed them. "Keep your eyes open, but hold your fire unless directly threatened." "Something wrong?" asked young Roberts, barely 18 and nervous on his first night watch. "Just a precaution," Jacob replied, offering no further explanation. As the men dispersed to their posts, Jacob climbed to the roof of the meeting house, the highest point in the settlement. From there he could see the surrounding landscape bathed in faint moonlight. Somewhere out there, Nahkohe was approaching his people, carrying Jacob's knife and, with it, the fate of both their families. Sarah found him there an hour later, a woolen shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the night chill. "Cooper said you released him," she said without preamble, settling beside her husband. Jacob nodded, unsurprised by how quickly the news had spread. "His people are out there. He's gone to speak with them." "Will he come back?" Jacob stared into the darkness. "I believe he will." Sarah's hand found his, warm and steady. "Then so do I." Together they waited, watching the eastern sky for the first hint of dawn and the return of a man they had once called enemy. First light painted the eastern horizon in pale gold when Nahkohe returned. Not alone, but accompanied by another Apache warrior, who moved with the same fluid grace. They appeared at the settlement's edge as if materializing from the dawn mist, approaching with open hands to show peaceful intent. Jacob, who had maintained his vigil through the night, climbed down from the meeting house roof to meet them. A small crowd of early rising settlers gathered behind him, drawn by the unprecedented sight of Apache, willingly approaching their community. "He returns as promised," Sarah murmured at Jacob's side. Nahkohe stopped several paces away. The warrior beside him, similar in build, but with a face marked by a single vertical scar from forehead to chin, regarded the settlers with watchful intensity. "Jacob Henderson," Nahkohe greeted, then reached to his belt. Several settlers raised rifles nervously, but he slowly withdrew only the antler-handled knife, presenting it hilt first. "I keep my word." Jacob accepted the knife, aware of the symbolic weight of the exchange. "Who is this?" he asked, nodding toward the second Apache. "My brother Chano." Nahkohe spoke with evident pride. "He leads our people while I was—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your guest." Chano studied Jacob with penetrating eyes. "My brother says you saved his life after he saved your child." "My wife tended his wounds," Jacob acknowledged. "But yes, we chose not to let him die." "A small mercy," Chano replied, "after taking our hunting grounds." The tension thickened. Behind Jacob, McAllister pushed forward, rifle ready. "This is our land now, savage. Bought and paid for." "Paid who?" Chano's question held no hostility, only genuine curiosity. "Not Apache, not Comanche, not Navajo. Who owned this land to sell it?" Before McAllister could escalate the confrontation, a small voice called out, "Leon Fighter!" Lily darted through the crowd, evading Sarah's reaching hands, and ran straight to Nahkohe. The Apache knelt to her level, his stern features softening. "Little one," he greeted her. "You are well? I made you another present." Lily thrust forward a small object, a crude clay pendant on a leather cord, shaped like a crude handprint. "Mama helped me bake it hard in the oven." The watching settlers froze, breaths held collectively as the child of their community stood fearlessly before two Apache warriors. Even McAllister lowered his rifle slightly, unwilling to risk a shot with Lily so close. Nahkohe accepted the gift with grave courtesy, examining it carefully before slipping it over his head. "Strong medicine," he pronounced. "Thank you, little one." Chano watched this exchange with evident surprise, then looked at Jacob with new understanding. "The child my brother saved," he stated rather than asked. Jacob nodded, placing a protective hand on Lily's shoulder as Sarah finally reached them and drew her daughter back. The mountain lion would have killed her. A moment of silence stretched between the groups as Chano absorbed this information. His gaze moved from Lily to Nahkohe, noting the clay pendant now hanging alongside his brother's medicine pouch. We must speak, Chano said finally. Not with weapons between us. Jacob gestured toward the meeting house. We can talk inside. No. Chano shook his head. Neutral ground. There. He pointed to a flat area near the creek, visible to both communities but belonging to neither. When the sun is highest, bring 3 men. We bring 3. What's this about? Jacob asked, looking to Nahkohe. Nahkohe touched the clay pendant at his chest. A different path, one where children need not fear. After the Apache brothers departed, the settlement erupted in argument. McAllister led those opposed to any meeting, while others, moved by Lily's fearless interaction with Nahkohe, advocated for hearing what the Apache had to say. It's a trap, McAllister insisted. They'll kill you and anyone who goes with you. If they wanted to attack, they could have done so last night, Jacob countered. They had warriors positioned around our settlement. This revelation sent a new wave of fear through the community. Sarah stepped forward, the clay pendants matching pair clearly made by the same small hands, hanging from her own neck. My daughter sees no enemy in Nahkohe, she said clearly. Only the man who saved her life. Perhaps we should follow her wisdom. Pastor Green nodded slowly. The good book speaks of letting children lead us to understanding. By midday, a decision had been reached. Jacob would attend the meeting, accompanied by Pastor Green, William Cooper, and surprisingly McAllister himself, who refused to be left behind. I don't trust them, McAllister said grimly, as they prepared to depart. But I trust you even less to negotiate for our safety, Henderson. Jacob checked his pistol before securing it in his belt. I'm not negotiating our safety, McAllister. I'm trying to ensure it for more than just the next sunrise. They walked to the meeting place, a flat stretch of ground beside the creek that marked the eastern boundary of the settlement's claim. 3 Apache warriors already waited there, Nahkohe, Chano, and an older man whose deeply lined face spoke of many seasons of hardship and wisdom. The clay pendant stood out starkly against Nahkohe's buckskin shirt, its childish craftsmanship incongruous, yet somehow fitting. As the settlers approached, he touched it briefly as if drawing strength from its simple presence. You came, he said to Jacob, approval evident in his tone. I gave my word, Jacob replied simply. Chano gestured for everyone to sit in a circle. Once settled, the older Apache produced a small wooden flute from his pouch, its surf-lust darkened with age and handling. He played a short, haunting melody that seemed to blend with the sound of the creek and the sighing of wind through grass. To call the good spirits to our council, Nahkohe explained quietly. When the music faded, Chano looked directly at Jacob. My brother has told me of the mountain lion, of your daughter, of how you spared his life when others would have taken it. His gaze shifted to McAllister briefly. Not all agree with your choice, as not all Apache agree with mine to meet with you. What exactly are we meeting about? McAllister demanded. Chano exchanged glances with Nahkohe before responding. Peace. The sun reached its zenith, casting short shadows around the circle of men seated by the creek. A breath of silence hung between them, broken only by the gentle sound of flowing water and distant birdsong. The word peace still lingered in the air, as unexpected as snow in summer. McAllister was the first to recover. Peace, he scoffed. After your people have raided our cattle and killed our men, after your people have taken our hunting grounds and poisoned our water with your mining, Chano counted evenly. The path of blood is long on both sides. Jacob raised a hand to silence further accusations. We're here to listen, not to count old wounds. He addressed Chano directly. What kind of peace do you propose? The Apache leader reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew a small object, a stone pipe bowl missing its wooden stem. The dark steatate was carved with intricate patterns, ancient symbols whose meanings were known only to the Apache people. A deep crack ran through its center, nearly splitting it in two. This belonged to our grandfather's grandfather, Chano explained. It was broken during a great battle with the Comanche, many seasons before white men came to these lands. He turned the broken pipe thoughtfully in his hands. Our people did not disappear. We found new ways to live alongside our enemies. Are you suggesting we could do the same? Pastor Green asked, leaning forward with interest. The alternative is more death, Nahkohe said quietly. On both sides. William Cooper, who had remained silent until now, studied the Apache warriors with a hunter's analytical eye. Your camp must be close to need these hunting grounds so badly. Chano nodded, respecting the observation. Half a day's ride west. The valleys there have been our summer grounds for generations. The deer come there to escape the heat. The plants we gather for medicine grow in those shadows. And our settlement sits at the eastern edge of those same grounds. Jacob realized aloud. The deer no longer come as they once did, Chano said. Your fences, your cattle, your noise drive them away. McAllister's jaw tightened. So you steal our cattle instead. To feed our children, the older Apache said, speaking for the first time. His voice carried the weight of decades. As you would do, if yours were hungry. A moment of uncomfortable truth descended on the gathering. Jacob studied the broken pipe in Chano's hands, seeing it as the Apache intended, a symbol of how ancient enemies had found ways to coexist when necessity demanded. What exactly are you proposing? Jacob asked. Nahkohe and Chano exchanged glances before Nahkohe spoke. The western valleys remain Apache hunting grounds. No fences, no cattle there. In return, Jacob prompted, no raids on your settlement or your herds, Chano said, and safe passage for traders between our peoples. Pastor Green nodded thoughtfully. Trade rather than theft, a biblical principle. And if we refuse, McAllister challenged. Chano's expression remained impassive, then more blood. Perhaps yours, perhaps ours, until one side is gone. He held up the broken pipe. Like this, we are stronger together than broken apart. Jacob considered the proposal carefully. The western valleys were of limited use to the settlement, rocky and less suitable for farming than the eastern plains they had already claimed. Giving hunting rights to the Apache would cost them little while potentially ending the cycle of raids and reprisals. How would we mark these boundaries? Jacob asked. How would both sides know where the hunting grounds begin? The creek that feeds your settlement, Chano replied, pointing to the flowing water beside them. From its source in the mountains to where it joins the river in the south. West of this line, Apache hunting grounds. East, your land, the old Apache warrior added. We have marked such boundaries for generations with stone cairns. Your people would recognize these markers. William Cooper nodded slowly. It could work. The western terrain isn't good for cattle anyway. McAllister stood abruptly. This is absurd. We don't negotiate with savages. Yet here you are, Nahkohe observed quietly, negotiating. The simple truth of this statement brought a reluctant half-smile to Jacob's face. He has you there, McAllister. The former cavalry officer glared at Jacob. This isn't a joke, Henderson. This is our future. Precisely, Jacob agreed, his expression sobering. Our future. Our children's future. He glanced meaningfully at Nahkohe. Thinking of Lily. I'd prefer that future include fewer graves and more understanding. McAllister spat on the ground, but didn't walk away. Jacob turned back to Chano. I cannot speak for the entire settlement. We would need to put this to a vote. As I must speak with our council, Chano acknowledged. But if both sides agree, Jacob extended his hand, a gesture of tentative trust. Then we would have peace. After a moment's hesitation, Chano clasped Jacob's forearm in the Apache manner of sealing an agreement. The broken pipe rested in his other hand, its ancient cracks a reminder of how difficult yet possible reconciliation could be. 3 days, Chano said as they released their grip. We will meet here again with our answers. As the two groups prepared to depart, Nahkohe approached Jacob privately. Your people will resist this path, he said quietly. Jacob nodded. As will yours, I imagine. Change comes hard to those who remember only one way of living. Nahkohe touched the clay pendant at his neck. But sometimes it takes only one act of courage to show a new way forward. They parted ways at the creek's edge, returning to communities that would need considerable convincing that peace was not just possible, but preferable to the familiar cycle of violence that had defined their existence for so long. 3 days later, as promised, a more formal council gathered at the creek boundary. The settlers had constructed a rough-hewn oak table, symbolic of their permanent presence on the land. The Apache brought buffalo hides to sit upon, representing their nomadic but ancient connection to the territory. The contrast was not lost on either side. The debate within Copper Creek settlement had been fierce. McAllister led the opposition, citing decades of frontier wisdom that warned against trusting Apache devils. Yet Jacob's standing in the community, combined with Pastor Green's moral arguments and the undeniable fact of Lily's rescue, had eventually swayed enough votes for a tentative approval. Among the Apache, Chano had faced similar resistance. Black Knife and his followers argued passionately against any agreement with the whites, but Nahkohe's story, backed by the respected elder Tolbear, had convinced enough warriors that a new approach might be necessary for their people's survival. Now representatives from both communities faced each other across the boundary creek. Jacob, Sarah, Pastor Green, Cooper and a reluctant McAllister represented the settlers. Chano, Nahkohe, Tolbear, Two Hawks and Black Knife came for the Apache. Between them, placed precisely at the center of the oak table, sat a small glass bottle of dark blue cobalt. Inside, visible through the transparent walls, was a single perfect hummingbird. Feather, iridescent green, smaller than a man's fingernail. Sarah had brought this precious object, explaining that it represented something delicate yet vibrant that required protection. In my father's medical practice, she told the gathered council, he kept his most potent medicines in blue bottles like this. Things that could heal or harm depending on how they were used. She touched the bottle gently. Peace between our peoples is equally powerful and equally fragile. Chan acknowledged this with a respectful nod before addressing the council. Our grandfathers would not have believed this day would come, yet here we stand, seeking a path other than blood, only because you realize you cannot drive us out, McAllister muttered, though less forcefully than he might have days earlier, or because we recognize that hatred consumes both sides. Nahkohe countered quietly. Like fire burning through dry grass, it leaves nothing but ash. Jacob unrolled a hand-drawn map onto the table. We've marked the boundaries as discussed. The creek divides our territories, east for our settlement, west for Apache hunting grounds. His finger traced the blue line of the waterway. Stone cairns will mark the boundary where the creek runs underground or becomes too small to see from a distance. Chano studied the map carefully, conferring briefly in Apache with Tolbear. The boundary is acceptable, he confirmed, but how will we ensure that your young men do not hunt in our grounds, or that hot-headed warriors do not raid your herds? Regular meetings. Jacob proposed. Like this one, every full moon representatives meet here to address any violations or concern. And trade, added Cooper unexpectedly. My people need ammunition and tools. Yours need, he hesitated. Unsure. Medicine, cloth, metal for arrowheads. Nahkohe supplied. Things we once obtained from Mexican traders before the wars. Pastor Green leaned forward eagerly. We could establish a regular trading day, benefit both communities. Black Knife scowled. And when the next white settlement arrives, and the next, will they honor this agreement? It was a question without an easy answer. Jacob exchanged glances with Sarah before responding honestly. We cannot promise what others will do, but we can stand by our word and taint our children to do the same. Children, Sarah echoed softly, her hand moving to the blue bottle. That's where this truly begins, isn't it? All eyes turned to her as she continued. My daughter no longer fears the Apache. She calls Nahkohe a fighter and asks when she can visit his people. She looked directly at the Apache women who had joined the gathering, standing respectfully behind their men. Do your children not deserve the same freedom from fear? Tall Bear, the eldest Apache present, nodded slowly. The old ones say that before the Spanish came with their horses and guns, different peoples traded more than they fought. Perhaps we can return to older ways. Lily, who had been watching quietly from a distance with the other settlement children, suddenly broke away from her minders. Before anyone could stop her, she darted to the council table and reached for the blue bottle. A collective intake of breath sounded from both sides, but the child simply picked up the delicate vessel and carried it around the table to where Nahkohe sat. With solemn ceremony, she presented it to him. "For you," she said clearly. "Mama says it's like peace, pretty but easy to break if you're not careful." Nahkohe accepted the bottle with equal seriousness, examining the hummingbird feather inside. "Thank you, little one. I will keep it safe." The simple gesture, unplanned and straight from a child's heart, affected the gathering more profoundly than hours of diplomatic talk. Even Black Knife's stern expression softened slightly. Jacob cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rougher than intended. "Let us formalize this agreement then. A treaty of peace between our peoples." Pastor Green produced a document on which the terms had been carefully written, with space for signatures or marks from both parties. One by one, the leaders made their marks, Apache and settler alike, committing to a fragile but hopeful future. As the council concluded, Nahkohe approached Jacob privately, still holding the blue bottle. "The real work begins now," he said quietly. "Teaching old hearts new ways will not be easy." Jacob nodded, watching as members of both communities cautiously began to mingle, examining each other's clothing, weapons, and tools with curious rather than hostile eyes. "No," he agreed, "but perhaps our children will find it easier than we do." The afternoon following the treaty signing transformed into an impromptu gathering, unlike anything either community had experienced. What began as formal diplomacy evolved into cautious cultural exchange. As curious members from both sides lingered at the boundary creek, children were the first to bridge the divide. Lily led her friends to meet the Apache children, communication flowing through universal languages of gesture, laughter, and play. Adults followed more hesitantly, drawn by curiosity, finally permitted expression after years of fear-imposed distance. Jacob stood with Chano, observing this tentative mingling with equal parts hope and weariness. "I never thought I'd see this day," Jacob admitted. "Nor I," Chano replied. "My father would think me bewitched." Nearby, Sarah had engaged several Apache women in conversation, with Nahkohe translating. Her medical bag lay open between them, its contents arrayed for examination. The Apache women reciprocated by displaying pouches of dried herbs and roots, used in their own healing traditions. Of particular interest was a pair of bone sewing needles that one elder Apache woman removed from a decorated quill case at her belt. The needles, yellowed with age and polished by generations of handling, were carved with intricate spiral patterns. Sarah examined them with obvious admiration. "She says these belonged to her grandmother's grandmother," Nahkohe translated. "The bone comes from the leg of a great elk her ancestor hunted before Apache had horses." "They're beautiful," Sarah marveled, carefully returning the precious implements. Through Nahkohe, she asked about their methods for treating fever and infection. As the women continued their exchange of medical knowledge, other interactions unfolded throughout the gathering. Cooper found himself in detailed discussion with two hawks about hunting techniques. Pastor Green listened attentively as Tall Bear explained Apache spiritual beliefs, finding surprising parallels with his own Christian teachings. Even McAllister, initially standing apart with arms firmly crossed, eventually engaged a group of Apache warriors in comparing weapons. Their shared respect for well-crafted tools of survival created a bridge where formal diplomacy had failed. "Your people adapt quickly," Chano observed to Jacob. "As do yours," Jacob replied. "Perhaps we're not so different as we believed." Chano's expression remained thoughtful. "Different enough, but perhaps that brings strength, like different woods in the same bow." As afternoon lengthened toward evening, Sarah organized a shared meal. Settlement women contributed bread, smoked ham and preserved fruit. Apache women offered venison, wild onions, and a sweet paste made from mesquite beans. The communities sat interspersed rather than separated, passing dishes back and forth across invisible boundaries. During this meal, Nahkohe approached Jacob with something wrapped in soft deerskin. "A gift," he explained, "to seal our agreement in the Apache way." Jacob unwrapped the bundle to reveal a stone smoking pipe, similar to the broken one Chano had shown previously, but intact and newly made. Its polished surface gleamed in the evening light, carved with symbols of mountains, rivers, and stars. "It tells the story of this place," Nahkohe explained, touching each symbol. "The mountains that shelter us, the waters that sustain us, the stars that guide us. These things belong to no man, but to all who live beneath them." The significance of such a gift was not lost on Jacob. He had learned enough about Apache customs to recognize that pipes were ceremonial objects used in their most important councils and spiritual observances. "I'm honored," Jacob said sincerely, "but I have nothing of equal value to offer in return." Nahkohe shook his head. "You already gave something of great value. You chose to trust when others would not." He glanced toward Lily, who was learning an Apache clapping game from children her age. "And your daughter reminds us why peace matters more than pride." As sunset painted the western mountains in shades of amber and gold, the community seemed eager to end this unprecedented gathering. Children pleaded for more time to play. Women exchanged final bits of knowledge and promises of future demonstrations. Men who had once aimed rifles at each other now nodded in respectful farewell. Pastor Green, inspired by the moment, asked permission to offer a blessing. Through Nahkohe's translation, Tall Bear agreed, suggesting they offer prayers in both traditions. The communities formed a great circle, Apache and settlers, alternating as words of hope rose in two languages toward the same darkening sky. Jacob found Sarah's hand as they stood in this circle. "Think this peace will last?" he whispered. "I don't know," she answered honestly, "but today it's real." As the gathering finally dispersed, with each community returning to their separate homes, Nahkohe lingered at the boundary creek with Jacob. The stone pipe passed between them, not yet lit, but holding the promise of many councils to come. "The hard part begins tomorrow," Nahkohe said. "Living this peace day after day." Jacob nodded, watching as the last families made their way home in opposite directions. "One day at a time," he replied, "just like any worthwhile endeavor." The pipe caught the last rays of sunset, its carved symbols seeming to come alive with golden light, a small, solid embodiment of something far more intangible that had begun beside a mountain lion's body and continued beside this boundary creek. "Understanding. Until the next full moon council," Nahkohe said, clasping Jacob's arm in farewell. "Until then," Jacob agreed. "My friend." 1 month after the treaty signing, the first true test of the fragile peace arrived without warning. Jacob was inspecting fence lines at the eastern boundary when Cooper rode up at a gallop, dust clouding behind his horse. "Tracks," Cooper called out, reining his mount to a sudden stop. "Large party, moving through the southern valley." "Not Apache," he added quickly, seeing Jacob's expression darken. "Different markings on their moccasins, different pattern to their travel." Jacob mounted his own horse. "Show me." They rode south, following the creek that now marked the formal boundary between settlement and Apache territory. Cooper led him to a sandy stretch where the evidence lay preserved in the earth, a wide trail of hoofprints and foot impressions crossing from east to west. "At least 20 riders," Cooper assessed, kneeling to study the signs more carefully. "Some women and children among them." "Heavily loaded horses." "They crossed yesterday, probably just before dusk." Jacob's brow furrowed as he surveyed the surrounding landscape, heading straight into Apache hunting grounds. There's more. Cooper withdrew a small object from his pocket, a brass arrowhead, its surface etched with unfamiliar markings. Found this caught in a tree trunk nearby. Not Apache make. Jacob turned the arrowhead in his palm, its unusual weight and design confirming Cooper's assessment. The brass had been cast rather than hammered, with a distinctive barbed shape different from the stone or iron points the Apache typically used. Comanche, maybe, Jacob suggested. Or Kiowa. Could be just a hunting party. Cooper shook his head. Too many for hunting, and they're traveling with women and children. This is a band on the move, either raiding or relocating. The implications hung between them unspoken. A large, unknown tribal group entering Apache hunting grounds could threaten not only the Apache but potentially the settlement as well. We need to warn Chano, Jacob decided. This band crossed our eastern boundary to enter their territory. Under the treaty, we're obligated to share this information. Cooper nodded reluctantly. McAllister won't like it. McAllister doesn't have to like it, Jacob replied, pocketing the brass arrowhead. The treaty isn't just words on paper when it's convenient, it's a commitment. They returned to the settlement and organized a small party to ride to the designated meeting point at the Boundary Creek. Jacob sent a young boy ahead with instructions to build 3 small smoke fires, the signal they had established with the Apache for unscheduled council meetings. Within hours, Nahkohe arrived with 2 hawks and another warrior. Jacob didn't recognize. Their expressions were already grim. You've seen them, Jacob surmised, producing the brass arrowhead. Nahkohe's eyes narrowed at the sight of it. Nahkohe here, Ben confirmed. From far southwest. Traditional enemies of our people, they crossed through our eastern territory yesterday, Jacob explained. At least 20 warriors plus women and children, heading directly into your hunting grounds. 2 hawks nodded. We found their camp from last night. They killed 2 deer in our territory and left the carcasses half-wasted. Deliberate disrespect, Nahkohe added. A challenge. Jacob considered this information carefully. Are they likely to threaten your people? Nahkohe would not bring women and children for simple raiding, Nahkohe replied. They may be seeking new territory after being pushed from their own lands. His gaze met Jacob's direct. First they will test the Apache. If we appear weak, they will test the white settlement next. The brass arrowhead seemed to grow heavier in Jacob's palm. What had initially appeared to be someone else's problem now clearly threatened both communities. What do you propose? Jacob asked. Nahkohe conferred briefly with his companions before responding. We track them together. Small party, experienced men from both our peoples, learn their numbers, their intentions, before deciding more. It was a sensible approach, though Jacob knew it would face resistance back at the settlement. Direct cooperation with the Apache on a military matter would push the boundaries of what many settlers were prepared to accept. I'll need to discuss this with our council, he said, but you have my support. Nahkohe nodded. Bring 3 men who can ride and track well. No more. We leave at dawn from this place. As Jacob and Cooper rode back to Copper Creek, the implications of this development weighed heavily between them. The settlement had barely adjusted to peace with the Apache. Now they faced the prospect of a new threat and the uncomfortable necessity of fighting alongside former enemies. The settlement council meeting that evening was predictably contentious. McAllister opposed any joint action with the Apache, arguing that the Chiricahua War problem should be left for the tribes to resolve among themselves. Let them fight each other, he insisted. Less trouble for us in the long run. Until the victor turns attention to our cattle, our crops, our people. Jacob countered, placing the brass arrowhead on the table for all to see. Nahkohe is right. If these Chiricahua are seeking new territory, they'll challenge anyone in their path. Pastor Green picked up the arrowhead, examining its unusual design. There's wisdom in the Apache approach. Better to understand the threat before confronting it. Sarah, who now regularly attended council meetings, added her voice. The treaty obligates us to mutual defense. If we abandon it at the first test, what was the point? Gradually, the council reached consensus. Jacob would lead a small party to join the Apache tracking mission, himself Cooper young Roberts, who had proven himself an excellent scout, and reluctantly, McAllister, who insisted on going to keep an eye on our Apache friends. As the meeting concluded, Sarah pulled Jacob aside, pressing something into his hand. It was a small leather pouch containing the brass arrowhead, now suspended from a sturdy cord. "Keep this with you," she said quietly, "not just as evidence of the threat, but as a reminder of what?" Jacob asked. "That sometimes the most unlikely alliances prove the most necessary." She kissed him gently. "And that you have something precious to return to." Jacob slipped the cord around his neck, tucking the pouch beneath his shirt, where it rested cool against his skin. Tomorrow would test more than just the peace between Apache and settler. It would test their capacity to see beyond old boundaries toward a new future, one where survival might depend on cooperation rather than conflict. 1 year later, the Boundary Creek flowed full with spring runoff, its waters catching the golden light of early morning. Jacob Henderson stood at the place where the treaty had been signed, watching as families from both communities gathered for what had become a seasonal tradition, the crossing celebration. Children ran freely between Apache and settler adults, their laughter a testament to how quickly the young forget old fears. Tables laden with food from both cultures lined the creek banks. Men who had once raised weapons against each other now compared hunting tales and weather predictions with the easy camaraderie of neighbors. "Hard to believe," Sarah said, joining her husband. "A year ago, this would have seemed impossible." Jacob nodded, his gaze drifting to where Nahkohe stood with Chano, both men watching their people with quiet pride. The brass arrowhead that had once signaled danger now hung openly from Jacob's belt, transformed into a symbol of the alliance that had saved both communities. The Chiricahua band had indeed proven dangerous. After tracking them for 3 days, the joint Apache settler scouting party had discovered their intention to raid both the Apache camp and Copper Creek settlement. Only the Artidans' cooperation between former enemies had prevented disaster. The joint defense, Apache stealth and knowledge of the terrain combined with settler firearms, had forced the Chiricahua to withdraw from the region entirely. That shared victory had cemented the fragile peace more effectively than any treaty. Even McAllister had grudgingly acknowledged that the Apache had fought honorably alongside the settlers. "Papa," Lily called, running toward them. "Come see what I made." She led them to a small table where children from both communities displayed crafts they had created. At the center stood Lily's contribution, a small clay model of the Boundary Creek, complete with tiny figures representing Apache and settlers, meeting at its banks. "This is you," she explained, pointing to a clay figure with a beard. "And this is Mama. And here's Lion Fighter." Her finger indicated a figure wearing a feathered headband. Nahkohe approached, examining the child's creation with appropriate seriousness. "Very good, little one," he approved. "You remembered the 3 stones." He pointed to small pebbles Lily had placed along the clay creek, representations of the cairns that now officially marked the boundary. From a pouch at his belt, Nahkohe withdrew a small object and presented it to Lily. "For you," he said, "to remember this day." It was a small stone pendant, polished smooth and etched with a simple design, a mountain lion in profile. A thin leather cord threaded through a carefully drilled hole allowed it to be worn as a necklace. "It's beautiful," Lily exclaimed, immediately slipping it over her head. "Stone remembers," Nahkohe told her solemnly. "Even when people forget." The morning progressed with feasting, games, and the trade that had become regular between the communities. Cooper haggled good-naturedly with 2 hawks over the price of tanned deer hide. Sarah and the Apache women exchanged bundles of herbs and medical knowledge. Pastor Green had even learned enough Apache language to offer a blessing that both peoples could understand. As the celebration continued, Jacob found a moment of quiet with Nahkohe by the creek's edge. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Jacob said. "That day with the mountain lion, why did you do it? You were starving, weak, you could have died." Nahkohe was silent for a long moment, watching the flowing water. My grandfather told a story, he said finally, about a time when animals spoke to men. He said the mountain lion once told our people that the rise of a warrior is not who he kills, but who he saves. He met Jacob's gaze. I did not think about Apache or white. I saw only a child in danger. One moment, Jacob mused. One decision and everything changed. For both our peoples, Nahkohe agreed. They were interrupted by Chano, who approached with news. A settler family had given birth to twins the previous night, the first children born in Copper Creek since the peace treaty. Simultaneously, an Apache woman had delivered a healthy son. Both communities were taking these births as a powerful omen. New life, Nahkohe said meaningfully. On the same night, as the sun reached its zenith, the communities gathered for a ceremony that combined traditions from both cultures. The stone pendant around Lily's neck caught the light as she stood between her parents, her small hand reaching trustingly for Nahkohe's weathered one. Pastor Green and Tall Bear spoke words of blessing over their joined peoples. The brass arrowhead at Jacob's belt and the stone pendant at Lily's neck gleamed in the sunlight, reminders of danger overcome and friendship forged through courage. Later, as the celebration wound down and families began their separate journeys home, Jacob stood once more at the boundary creek with Sarah at his side. Across the water, Nahkohe raised a hand in farewell before turning toward the western hills, where his people's camp awaited. Do you think our grandchildren will remember how this peace began? Sarah wondered. With a starving Apache and a mountain lion, and our daughter in the wrong place at the right time. Jacob squeezed her hand, watching as Lily skipped ahead of them toward home, her stone pendant bouncing against her chest with each step. Some stories, he said, are too important to forget.